Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I recently watched a video from a channel called React 2.0. And I know, React content creators don't have a great reputation here on YouTube. Without going too far into it, I will say that I think they are a very good React channel. They have a lot to say that's very interesting. They are very transformative, and they are primarily about the reactions of the people creating the videos rather than what they are reacting to. And most interestingly, they are natives of India who specialize in reacting to Hollywood movies. The video I watched was two of their reactors. I don't know if there are more. This is the only video I watched from this channel. But two of them were reacting to The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Very, very interesting choice. At least to me. Obviously, some of the other stuff they've reacted to is probably more interesting to other viewers. They've done a lot of classic Disney animated films, for example. But I like fantasy fiction, and so this had a particular appeal to me. And I also went into it with a bit of a mindset thinking about the modern controversy about representation in storytelling. I wanted to see how these people from an entirely different cultural context would react to Lord of the Rings. So our reactors began by presenting some general thoughts on the movie just based on the title and what they had been told, that it was one of the landmark creations in cinema history, which is very true. They speculated about the rings. In fact, one of the reactors speculated that it would be a story about a goldsmith, which is not entirely inaccurate, but nevertheless, not really getting at the theme of the story. They also mentioned that rings are used in their wedding ceremonies, and they represent a number of things in their culture, and they, just did some general speculation. Then they went on, they watched the movie, they had exactly the reactions you probably expect they would have. In fact, it's very wholesome viewing. One of the things I like the most is they applaud in response to moments they really appreciated in the film. And that's not a reaction I've ever really seen very often in the cinema. I know I saw all of the Lord of the Rings films in theaters, and I don't think people really applauded like that, except at the end of the films, of course, when we respond to the work and effort that the creators put into the film. But they applauded at big moments in the film, like when Arwen wiped out the ring wraiths in the river, when Gandalf broke the bridge to send the Balrog into the abyss. These were moments when they just spontaneously started applauding, even though they were pretty much alone in a room by themselves. It was very endearing, for sure. But they also recognized everything that you would expect them to recognize. They recognized right away, oh, Gandalf is a wizard. He has magical powers. When he is reunited with Bilbo, these are old friends who are just meeting after a long time. These are actually things they say in their reaction to the movie. It's impressive how universal this story was, that they were able to pick up on it instantaneously. But what was really interesting to me was the way they began to label characters right away. Gandalf was a wizard. The orcs were monsters. Perhaps most interestingly, Aragorn was a soldier. Now, yes, they understood later on that he was a king, but that was not immediately apparent to them. And for the majority of the film, they refer to him as the soldier. They didn't refer to him by name. Maybe it was a little difficult for them to remember or say. They called him the soldier, which I thought was fascinating. They identified him with this role of a defender and a fighter, which is the bulk of what Aragorn is, at least in the Lord of the Rings saga. Obviously, eventually he becomes a political leader, and he has other roles he fulfills. But in the story about the War of the Ring, Aragorn is a soldier and a defender of his people, and they picked up on that instantaneously. However, there was one moment that really made it clear to me what was going on in this video, in their reactions. And that is the moment when Bilbo sees the ring in Rivendell, and for a moment he's transformed from this kindly old grandfatherly figure to a leering, covetous old monster. And at that moment, one of the reactors says, "Ah, there is a devil in every man. You never know when it will come out." And that was when I realized their reactions came because of representation. Certain ideas, themes, character archetypes were being represented to them with a great deal of skill and technical precision, and they were reacting to that. I went into watching this video with a mindset that was framed by the modern discussion of representation, which means I want to see myself represented in a story. There has been a big pushback against this. Not because we don't think we should see ourselves in the story, but because there are other things that need to be represented in the story. Now, I can't say for sure, but I don't think either of the men reacting to Lord of the Rings in React 2.0's video were wizards or soldiers. According to the title of the video, they are villagers. I presume they're from a small rural part of India where they haven't had ready access to a lot of Western media, because this is all supposedly their first reaction to these movies. And yet they were able to recognize what was represented to them, because the purpose of art is partly to represent things. It is also to give impressions of things, that is to say, to provoke an emotional response, which is the basis of the impressionistic movement in art. However, part of art is also to represent things. When we discuss and debate representation in art, we are not discussing and debating whether representation is a role of art. There is a debate about how much a role in art representation should be, how much is ideal for any given piece of art, but representation is a part of what art does. No, the modern debate about representation is about equity. Equity, as defined by Vice President Kamala Harris, is the notion that everyone should wind up in the same place, or that everyone should have the same thing. Equity has its role to play in discussions, especially discussions about commerce or government. Everyone wants equitable treatment from the government. They want the same treatment as anyone else would get. Everyone wants to get the same thing for their money. They don't want to pay $5 for something when someone else is paying $1 for that thing. In these discussions, equity is good and useful, but in art, equity has almost no role to play. I hate to break it to you, but equity in art is not only foolish, it is impossible. The purpose of art is to represent something to you, and it cannot represent that thing to you in equitable fashion. It just can't. You see, a piece of art is specific. The Mona Lisa is a portrait of a specific person from a specific time and a specific place. You can paint a different person in that exact same pose and in that exact same place, but not at that exact same time. And even if you keep those two things, place and pose, the same, you still have a radically different piece of art. Even if, for example, we could get Da Vinci to paint this painting, which we can't, it would still be a different piece of art. The two pieces of art are never going to be equitable. The Mona Lisa cannot depict everyone, nor can another painting attempting to be the Mona Lisa create equity in art. The very act of attempting to represent something to us forces art to be inequitable, because if we are representing two different things, then the representations must also be different. And this, I think, is why, when we see these attempts to force equity of representation into art, it always feels so hollow. Let me give you an example. This is a picture that is meant to represent the character of Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. And the intention is to represent him in an equitable way. There are no black people in The Lord of the Rings, because The Lord of the Rings was written as a mythology for England, and there are very few black people native to England. That is an inequity. Tolkien's story did not represent all people of different races and ethnicities reaching the same points, and so it must be changed. But by making this change, they take a piece of art that is supposed to represent something very specific, and they make it meaningless. It's not representative anymore because it doesn't represent what the story was constructed to tell. Instead, it becomes meaningless as art and becomes a broad generalization about what the artist wishes to see. Instead of representing a specific set of circumstances that lead to a specific set of outcomes about a specific person, it instead says, none of the details matter. None of the artisanship matters. All that matters is the equity of the outcome. And that kills art. Art is about specifics and not generalities. It is about a specific set of circumstances, a specific set of events, a specific set of decisions by a specific set of people. You cannot take art and turn it into a generality through principles like equity. Every time you attempt it, you will just undermine the quality of the art. This is why people who react, like React 2.0, by pointing out specific roles and specific behaviors and applauding certain actions, can react well to art, and everyone who talks about equity and representation in art don't react to art at all. At least that's what I think.